A friend of my parents once said at a dinner party, young people today think they invented sex, which is obviously and demonstrably not true, but I think it shows how different generations don't get each other.
Okay, first of all, what made them say that, especially at a dinner party?
It was connected to something I said about a rock concert I'd just been to, but that's for later. But my point is that different generations can feel defensive and threatened by younger generations.
Well, possibly, but at the same time, are we really that different if every generation feels like that?
This isn't a podcast with all the answers.
It's a conversation about figuring things out as you go.
From two very different generations.
With Michelle R. Williams
and Nick Hurst.
Welcome to Life Happens.
Okay, so on the basis that we are quite possibly from different generations, let's look at that question that you just asked. Are we really that different? Myth versus reality. But first, Michelle, what have you been up to this last week?
There is actually something I want to mention, I want to talk about, because last week I was part of this amazing event and, I don't want to really get into details, but long story short, it was about late Olympic winner who was Czech and she married an American and she passed away very recently. And now her daughters came back to Czech Republic and it was this whole big thing. And I could just talk about it for hours, but I obviously won't here. But the reason I want to mention it is that it made me think sort of about things we do talk about in this podcast. And, I was working as a translator there because these women didn't speak any Czech and no one at that event spoke any English. So that was actually the first time I ever worked as a translator. Crazy job. I was honestly expecting it to be easier, but it's very challenging. And I really admire people who do that full time because after 10 hours of that event, my brain was just liquid dripping out of my ears. And I couldn't tell the difference between English and Czech and French and Japanese at that point. So that was interesting, but I really loved it. But the reason I wanted to mention it is that I witnessed something so beautiful between people who didn't speak each other's language. And, technically you think it can never be really personal. How can you speak with someone who doesn't speak your language? And how can you connect with them? And these people, these two American women met parts of their Czech family they didn't even know existed few days prior. So, it was very emotional and it was kind of weird being the one having to speak for them because I didn't know them. So they were saying something very emotional, but it sort of went through me. So I was like, how can you guys ever connect speaking through someone else? But I witnessed how easy it was and how close these people got, even though they didn't speak each other's language. And it sort of made me think about, today's topic, because we often talk about connections between generations. I mean, look at you and me, at the end of the day, when you look at us, you are probably they have nothing to talk about, how they can even have something to talk about despite the generation difference. But clearly it works through every differences. And I love how people can just connect despite all of these things. I mean, I'm here talking about language differences. You being married to a Czech woman, you probably know more about it than I do. But, you get my point. And so that made me think about today's topic and how we can just connect with people no matter the circumstances.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, apart from the fact that the whole event was a really interesting mix of cultures in that two women had grown up in America, but their mother was Czech and then visiting Czechia for the first time, wasn't it? They visited.
One of them. It was the first time for one of the sisters, yeah.
And neither of them speaking Czech. So
No.
you having to be the conduit, not only for language, but actually emotion. I would have thought, knowing me, I'd have found it quite difficult to hold it all together at times if I had your linguistic skills. So good for you, man, to use your expression.
Good for you, man. No, yeah, right. It was very emotional, and I am not really an emotional person, and this whole thing was not really personal to me. I got to it so randomly because I'm someone who just loves these like life side quests, as I call it. These like random things you do that make no sense. And so, it wasn't like they were my family or something like that. Emotionally, it had nothing to do with me, but it really touched me. And after spending like 10 hours with all of these people, I felt like I knew them. And it was so weird, but at the same time, it was really beautiful. So, yeah. But also, speaking of today's topic, there is another reason why I sort of thought of that topic. And that's because I started binge watching Downton Abbey. We just had like an hour-long conversation about that, and I love it. It's my new hyperfixation, and it will be my personality for like next 3 months. But the thing is that for those who don't know it, it's basically what would you describe it? A history?
It's a period piece television series from England, the like of
Thank you.
which English TV does particularly well, and it just portrays a period of time before, during, and after the First World War in Britain, and the upper class family living in this big mansion house in its own grounds called Downton Abbey, hence the name of the TV series, and the family who occupy it, headed up by the Earl of Downton, and of course their servants, of which there are many. And so the stories of all the people there that you really, really get to know, and in some cases love, and in some cases maybe not so much. And of course, the portrayal of historical events. So that's a quick précis of what Downton Abbey is about.
Thank you. You're much better in describing things like that than me, so thank you. But so my point was, I started watching it because it's quite useful for my book that I'm writing. And I don't even know what I was expecting from it, but I was expecting a period drama. It's like more than 100 years ago. And so that's what I was expecting. But as I started watching it, and I know it's a fiction, okay? It's not really based on like anything. But I think it's portrayed it very well. And the thing is that even 100 years ago, people had the same problems we have nowadays. It's all about dating and family issues and money drama and like this and that. Basically, the things we care about nowadays, literally. And so that made me think like every generation actually deals with the same problems. It might look slightly different, based on technology or how world evolves, but the core of it is actually the same. So, are we really that different nowadays than we were 100 years ago?
Superficially, I would say, because, the circumstances or the environment in which we live changes. So if 100 years ago you'd have gone to somebody with your laptop and say, look at this on YouTube, they'd be thinking that you're just going, because it would be gibberish to them. So
well, of course.
That's a superficial thing that happens through every generation as we progress or at least change. But no, I think the essential human traits and issues and problems that we confront are more or less the same, and our emotions are the same. How we deal with it are the same.
Yeah.
And that's why sometimes if you can make that bridge across the generations, as maybe you and I have done, you realize that it's not a barrier to communication and understanding.
Yeah, because I feel, like we really sort of portray different generations as these very different kinds of people that can never understand each other. And yeah, sometimes obviously that's the case, and some stereotypes are just like that. But I feel like it's just sort of like a social construct. Like we are pressured to be our generation and judge others But at the same time, and I think I realized that, I mean, I kind of knew that, but like I realized that a few episodes ago when I don't remember what it was, but you said something. We were talking about like soft life crisis or something like that. And you were like, yeah, no, you will feel that for the rest of your life. And I was like, oh, so like, you know, you're such a different generation than me. And I just thought that, you know, people this age and possibly this generation had that figured it out and suddenly sort of told me that no, that's not how it works. And suddenly your problem felt exactly like mine. So I was like, it's probably not a generational thing, you know? So that's what this is about.
It's true that there are certain things where we do connect. It's just you have to look slightly beyond that kind of natural tendency of dismissing maybe an older generation, which I know in certain cultures, I mean, I think this is true of the culture in the UK and maybe America as well, that it's very youth oriented, and older people, and especially once people have stopped working, are kind of regarded in a lower way. You know, there's an element of judgment going on there. And actually, I just wanted to go back to something you said, because you said something about when we're younger, we judge other generations. What did you mean by that? Do you feel, or that you feel pressure to judge the generation?
I feel like, you know, it's just so natural, sort of, but in a way, you just sort of grow up with that. And I feel like if you are being judged from like other generations, you naturally learn how to judge them back. You know what I mean? Like if I mean, I've been hearing for basically my whole life, like your generation is this and that, and like you have no future, and like this generation is blah blah blah, you know, things like that. And when you have like others judging you, you suddenly want to fight back and judge them back. So like if someone tells you, which unfortunately is something that happens, and funnily enough, it's something my father does because he's not really into like modern technology and stuff. And for example, he told me like you wouldn't be able, or like your generation wouldn't be able to read in a paper map. And he sort of said it in like very nasty way. And I was like, yeah, no, I know that the majority of my generation probably won't be able to do that. But first of all, why when we don't need it? And second of all, you can't use GPS and you can't use this and that, you know? And if someone gave you the most modern Tesla, you wouldn't be able to park it, you know? And so I'm like, yeah, we can't do that, but you can't do that. And the world evolves, and it's very probable that we won't need to know how to read a paper map, but you be sure you will need to use GPS one day. So I feel like it's sort of, to a certain point, it's like a defense mechanism. When someone's offending me, I offend them back. And also coming from that, you know, obviously it's some sort of insecurity, probably on both sides
Yeah,
of
definitely.
generations.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think older generations will be perhaps defensive about um, a lack of understanding of new technology, and that's probably gone through, you know, for hundreds of years. When you sort of think back to, you know, when somebody invented the plow, and there'll be
You remember
older.
that?
Yeah, actually, I was there practicing. I'm just trying to think of. I'm trying to think of early inventions here. Give me a break. But
I'm sorry.
it's always been a thing. It's quite an interesting little sort of side issue that you raise there. That, yeah, why should you need to learn how to read a map? And yet, for me, being of my generation, I think, well, that's a skill that you should have, just because, you know, you might need it. And to be honest, it's not so different from reading a map on a screen or on your phone, that
Yeah,
you're
okay, that was
utilizing the same skills. I mean, the hardest skill about reading a map, I can tell you, I remember the days, was folding it up. You have a paper map and you unfold it, and it's got all these complicated folds, and then you get this huge, great sort of sheet that you're looking at and
I could never.
trying to juggle it around, and then try to fold it back up again. Boy, was that hard. That was the
Well, that is
skill.
definitely not my generation's problem. to be fair.
It definitely isn't.
But that was literally the first example I thought of. I don't know why, maybe because that's something my dad told me. But you got my point with that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
to be fair, you know how to read a map. When was the last time you actually needed it?
It's true. It's true. I mean, I've spent a lot of time over the last 16 years driving across Europe between Czechia and the UK. And so, it's quite a drive. It's, well over 1,000 kilometers. And when I first was doing it, it would be with a big road map, those big books, not a paper map that you had to unfold. And I can remember actually the very, very first time I did it, it was on my own, and I was driving from my home in England to Prague. And I had the map out there, plus I'd sort of printed off route that was on lots of different pages, and somehow I managed to make it here. Now I sit in the car and I've got a massive great screen with GPS map and a woman's voice telling me, in 3 miles time, you will have to turn right, and so on and so forth. So yeah, we just don't need that skill anymore. So it becomes a redundant skill. Something it just made me think of, going back to my teaching days in Czechia, but also going back to something that's really, really fundamental to people. And I'd be interested to hear your generation's take on this. So you be prepared to
Gosh,
speak for an entire generation. When
perfect.
I was teaching in schools in Czechia, and I taught in 4 in total, all of them had very strict, part of the curriculum was that kids had to learn to write with a pen. And here is a pen, just in case you're not sure what a
Yeah,
pen is.
I can
And
still do that,
and so I know your school, your primary school where I taught you, the headmistress there was really strict about it. She really, really used to bang on about it to all the other teachers. So you've got to make sure that these kids learn how to write and do joined up handwriting. And of course, speaking as a teacher who then has work handed into them that you have to mark and you have to read their handwriting. It's absolute pain. And I used to say to the kids, sort of quietly, and say, don't quote me on this, guys, but to be honest, after you left school, you'll probably hardly ever write or pick up a pen apart from to sign your name or, maybe fill out a form or something, because you do it all on
Not
a
even
computer.
that. Not even that. I
Yeah.
spent past few days doing paperwork for my move to Ireland, and I'm even signing it digitally. So, not even that anymore.
My point is that what I was going to make was that once, actually, this even happened while I was still at school. I was about to say once I left school, but no, it was before I left school. I started teaching myself how to write really quickly, but not joined up. So I was writing I'm pointing at the screen in front of me here. I'm looking at words written on a screen. And of course, they're not joined up writing. So in a way, why do we join up writing? It's an absurdity, because we often create something that is just a hieroglyphical scroll that you cannot interpret. And I know, because my wife is teaching, and she's teaching English. She often, when she's marking stuff, and actually you've helped her with marking, and
I did. It was.
she'll bring me things that kids have written in their own hand, as we say. And she said, "Can you tell me what this is? I can't decipher it at all." And she spent so much time over this. And now it started to think, is it worth it? And what I'm saying is I taught myself to write printed, not joined up. And when I say taught myself, what I mean was taught myself to do it fast. So I could print as quickly as I could write with joined up writing, and even faster, to be honest. And I'm not sure that I've used joined up writing since.
Yeah,
And
me
of
neither.
course, everything else is on a screen. I mean, I do, when I'm working on my book, for example, and I know you do this as well, I do write lots of handwritten notes. But again, they are all printed. They're not in joined up writing. So the point, to bring it back to the generational thing, is that there's a bit of me in my conditioning, my brain conditioning, that says everybody should learn to write joined up writing. But the
Mm.
logic in me, the logician, says, why? If you're never going to use
Literally.
it, why? And it's that thing of hanging on to skills that are actually now redundant. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, writing is almost, in my brain, it feels like it's almost as important in your everyday life as breathing. To not know how to write is to not know how
Yeah,
to
but also
breathe.
you are a writer. That's
Yeah, yeah.
different. You are thinking about it from the point of view that you write a lot, like in general. But if you think about like normal people, they don't write as much. They write
No,
emails, and that's pretty
well,
much it.
exactly, and they do that on the screens and on a keyboard. That's my point, because I did, as I said, I would say to the kids in school, once you leave school or further education, you're probably never going to need to learn to write. So I'm kind of on their side. That's the thing. I'm sort of trying to bridge generations, but I can understand the conditioning in your head for an older generation that says, "No, you must know how to write joined up writing."
And I think that you put it up like really well, because it's literally it. And something in your mind is like, yeah, everyone should know that. It's like the bare minimum. Of course, we have to teach our kids, blah, blah, blah. But logically, it's much more practical to know how to type fast. Like, for example, I can't write on a keyboard with all 10 fingers. I use like 2 of them. And I was never taught that. I mean, it works for me, but it's much more important skill to know how to do that than to have perfect handwriting and use it a lot and practice that. But I think that that's the example with so many things about different generations, how, especially because, you are the parent or the grandparent and you want to teach your kids what do you think it's important. And I genuinely believe that you mean well. I don't mean you like you, but you in general.
Yeah.
I'm sure that my dad means well when he thinks I should know how to read a map, but I feel like it's very hard for some people to accept that their skills they kept practicing for years or their whole life are now useless. You don't want to feel useless.
Okay, so that's a good point, because what you're basically saying is, where I was saying that certain skills become redundant. We don't need joined up writing. We don't need to read paper maps. But what you're saying there is that the older generation who have these skills, that the fact that the skills are becoming redundant is actually making them feel redundant and irrelevant.
Yeah, of course. And I feel like if you sort of think about basic human psychology, when you feel like you are useless or when you feel like something you do is useless, you tend to push it onto other people more. So you want to make yourself feel better. So if you subconsciously or even consciously know that your amazing skill of being able to read paper maps is not impressive anymore, that makes you feel bad. So you, as a defense mechanism, you try to make other people feel bad. Like, oh, you can't do that, I do, so I'm better. And I feel like this is the main reason or the core of dividing different generations and why different generations can't understand each other.
Completely. I completely get it. I think we've got to the whole core of the matter. We can dismiss all the other bits. It is that fact that as you get older and you see the skills that you have, some basic core skills, whatever they might be, being supplanted because there's now new things. So, with writing, we used to use pens. Now we use a keyboard. That's fine. In caveman days, they used to use burnt sticks on a cave. I really don't know that.
You remember
Despite
that?
looks, I don't remember that. No, I knew
Is
you were
that how
going to
you
go
learned
there.
to write?
I was trying to get it in first before you
You
attacked
walked
me.
into that. You
So,
absolutely walked into that.
but I can see that it is that threatened feeling, and
Of
I don't
course.
know, how do you counter that? I mean, I think just try to sort of at least keep abreast of what is happening today and understand it. Understand that things change. That you might be 80 today, but when you were 20, there were 80-year-olds who felt the same about you.
Yeah.
I think, in a
But you
way,
don't have that issue.
Well, as I've mentioned before on the podcast, I grew up in this big old house with a number of elderly relatives. And one of them, who I was really close to, my great aunt, my grandfather's sister. My grandfather came from a family of 9 children, but he was kind of the alpha and looked after the family, was kind of the head of the family. But his sister, Frida, from the age of 13, had been profoundly deaf. So she lived with him and was looked after him. Although, having said that, she actually worked into her 90s running our farm shop because we had a farm. However, and she never allowed her deafness to be an obstacle, and she could sign and stuff. But she and I were very close, and I used to go every day and spend an hour chatting with her at least after I got back from school. And as I say, we're all in the same house, but it was a big house there. Actually, had to go from one
You
part
knew
of the house
sign language?
outside. No, well, we developed our own kind of shorthand sign language, I would call it. But first of all, she was very, very good at lip reading. So I would be speaking to her like this, very carefully,
You
enunciating
still do
everything.
that. This stuck with you.
I like to be understood. And then I would just sometimes just spell words in the air and she would follow it. And very occasionally I might need to write something down. But we completely understood each other. But, she was born in the or something, so she was
Oh.
born, under Queen Victoria. So lived a life that saw huge amount of differences. And these are things that we would discuss, and she would describe what life was like for her when she was a little girl and things. I gained a real understanding of how things had changed. And I tried to help her understand modern society. It wasn't very easy. I mean, she never listened to the radio or watched TV because she couldn't hear. So her experience of life was very limited, but I learned a lot from that, and it was really interesting. So in a way, that's kind of helped me, I suppose, on some subconscious level. So now I'm an old guy like my aunt, my great aunt. I mean, when I would be going and sitting with her after school and I would be a young teenager, she would have been in her mid to late 80s. So there was a huge, huge age difference there. So I kind of get age differences. I actually often think of great Aunt Frida these days and think, what would she have made of, me sitting on a mobile phone and doing, mobile phone stuff? And she had this expression, and then she would just be sitting and go, the very idea. So it's one of those things that where, yes, there are changes, there are superficial, if you like, changes happen that are inevitable, technological, the things that we kind of control, and maybe because the skills needed, the way that you feel as you get older and you feel, oh, I'm becoming redundant because I don't understand these skills. But then there are other things as well. There's like the attitudes, societal attitudes, which do change, and we like to think are getting better in lots of ways. We're trying to be more inclusive and understanding. And I see it here, I've got the screen in front of me, attitudes to mental health, for example, which is something that we've talked a lot about in these podcasts. In the days of my grandparents, it would be kind of, oh, pull yourself together. Goodness sake, get on with it. Stiff upper lip and all that. Now we're a little bit more open-minded about this. But I mean, how does it look from where you're standing?
Well, from where I'm standing, I just really don't think that we can divide people into groups like that, into like any groups. I was growing up surrounded by my dad's and my grandpa's friends a lot. I think I already talked about it in this podcast. And so I sort of saw the generation of my dad and my grandpa just like interacting. And I feel like there are such great differences between people in their, I don't know, 50s, 60s, 70s, because it really depends on like how open-minded you are. And this is something that we circle towards every single episode, self-awareness. And this sort of like confidence in the way that you don't get insecure because you don't know something. And you have two types of people. You have people who are like, oh my gosh, there are these all these new things. Let me see them, let me learn. That's great, blah, blah, blah. And then you have exactly these types of stereotypical older generations when they're like, no, now everything is worse. I don't even want to learn that because of XYZ. I don't even know what a great excuse for that is, to be fair, apart from insecurity. But I think that I literally stand by the idea of different generations educating each other. And I feel like you are always taught like, yeah, listen to the older generation, listen to your parents, listen to your grandparents. They have so much to teach you. Yes, but I never really heard from someone older saying, oh, I want to learn from the younger generation, which I feel like is something that you do. And there are certain types of people who do that. And I think that's the easy way to do it, to connect with people throughout the generations. And, I see it with my grandpa, who one day just came to me and he was like, hey, I want to start using Instagram. Can you tell me how to do it? And, I taught him, and now he's using Instagram in his fucking 70s, 60s, late 60s. And I just think that it's actually really brave to do that, to admit like, hey, there's this thing that for you is the basic knowledge, but I don't know that and I want to know that. Can you teach me? And I feel like as an adult, asking that of like a 15-year-old, the insecurity is there. You kind of don't want to do that. I mean, you give me your answer for that, but that's the vibe I'm getting from it.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, and I think I like to think that I do that, seek out the information I need from the generational thing. And by the way, I've always said to you, next time we're in the same place, you've got to show me how to work Instagram because I'm terrible at it.
Okay, remind me next week and I will show you.
I do Facebook, but Facebook is, always jokingly referred to as the old people's social media. I even saw that in a movie earlier this week. So I do think that it's good if older people can reach out to younger people. Once you're a parent, that often happens by default because, it's like you get a new computer or you get even your smart TV, and then you look at the instruction book and you're thinking, where's my son? Come on, set up my computer, set up my TV.
Yeah, that's
And you
laziness.
naturally get that. Well, I don't know. I think it's a good
But,
educational thing.
with that, you sort of reminded me another point that I wanted to make, because like some time ago in this episode, I was saying how insecure the old generation might be and stuff like that. And I feel like I was too hard on older generations, which sort of just proved this point of the episode, but never mind. But I wanted to add that I feel like my generation, I feel like I'm somewhere in between, because I was born 2004, so I'm sort of like older Gen Z, but not fully. I feel like just between 2003 and 2005 is just like some generation on its own, to be fair. But we are only adults now and like lately. And I remember and I did it, I see my sister do it, I see like plenty of kids, teenagers, young people do it. When an older generation asks them to something like, hey, can you help me with Instagram? Can you help me with WhatsApp? Stuff like that. Often the reaction from the younger person is, oh my gosh, mom, like that's basic knowledge. Like, what do you mean you can't do that? It's like so simple. So I feel like we sort of feed into this insecurity, because if someone is brave enough to ask for help, if my grandpa asked me like, hey, can you show me how to use Instagram? And I would be like, geez, grandpa, like that's so embarrassing. Everyone knows how to use Instagram. Like, what are you old? And I would make some comment like that. I can imagine him being embarrassed and even more insecure and be like, well,
Yeah,
I
of
will never
course.
ask a younger generation ever again because it makes me look stupid.
Yeah.
So the insecurity, as I said, plays a huge role. But I think that younger generation can really support, even subconsciously, that insecurity.
Yeah, but it works both ways because
Of course.
whilst an older generation person might not be able to explain the intricacies of using Instagram, there is a tremendous amount of accumulated wisdom and experience that you can tap into from older people, and that can be really useful. And I mean, really useful in for example, in business terms or running the country terms, political terms. Always, mind you, there are certain world leaders at the moment who are of an older generation who are not necessarily covering themselves in glory, but we'll steer clear of political issues. So it does work both ways in that communication. Being the key is, can you be open to communication? If you're older, can you
Literally.
be open to asking somebody younger, how do I do this? And can the younger person be, yeah, sure, there's no problem, let me show you, rather than, oh my God, can't you do that? Because, imagine if somebody says that to you,
Of course.
learning a new skill, and your teacher goes, oh, come on, can't you do that? I mean, if I'd have said that to you in class, it would have.
I'm sure that you did. I'm sure that ever happened. But on the other hand, just yesterday I was making fun of you because you couldn't do something on WhatsApp. So I think we are even. But that was in a good spirit. See, you don't even remember now, but that was in a good spirit.
I don't.
But that's exactly, no, I get your point, and that's exactly why I think that our friendship and our communication works, because we are both open to learn from other people, and it doesn't matter who these people are. It's not just between generations, it's between everything. You can't know everything, and I'm someone who loves to sort of get educated.
Another thing that we touched on earlier about generations is how your attitudes change or don't change. And often your values, a sense of values that you grow up with, I guess, learn from your parents and your schooling at the time, and are kind of inculcated into your brain, into your psyche, really, tend to be your attitudes and values throughout your life. And what is one of the hardest things to do is, whilst you can learn a new physical skill, how to physically operate a mobile phone, for example, an attitude, learning a new attitude, that's really hard to change part of your brain. So when I was growing up, my grandparents had grown up as I mentioned earlier, in the Victorian era, which was very, very repressive socially outside. I mean, maybe not so much behind closed doors, who knows, because the doors were closed, but just in terms of the attitude, and I'm talking very much about British society. I just want to take it back to the example I gave right at the beginning of this particular episode of when I walked in on this dinner party that my parents were having, and I'd just come back from a concert. I'd seen an American band called The Tubes at the Hammersmith Odeon in London. And it was an amazing, amazing show, and I was full of it. So they were asking me about it. And I was describing this one song that they did. This particular song was called Don't Touch Me There, and it was a duet between the main lead singer, and then they had a sort of girl lead singer as well who featured on some songs. And they both came on stage on this enormous and real motorbike, all dressed totally in leather. And the song was a kind of pastiche of a famous song from the, I think, very early 60s called Leader of the Pack, which is all about bikers. So they're both sitting, and they were doing this kind of choreographed dance, almost sitting on the motorbike. And as I say, dressed in black leather, head to toe, and kind of all over each other. It was kind of suggestive, but that's all it was, suggestive. And then it would reach the chorus bit, and I can't remember exactly the words that she'd be saying, but culminated in her going, "Don't touch me there." And all I said was, I described it exactly as I described it to you, pretty much to everybody at the dinner party. And I said, and you can guess where there was. And that's all I said. And then this lady, close friend of my parents, who was very sort of prudish, very much had the kind of values, Victorian values. Not a bad thing in many ways, but she just was a bit shocked that I should say that. And I didn't say, that's all I said. I didn't say anything untoward or use any bad words or anything. And she just said, young people today think they invented sex. And I was a bit taken aback by that. And, I'm talking about something that happened in the late 70s. I still remember it so vividly. We've mentioned many times, actually, in episodes, how you are Gen Z. Do these labels for different generations, let's just quickly go through them. I've pulled it up on my screen here. So we have baby boomers from 1946 to 1964 and Gen X. I didn't know that. 1965 to 1980. Millennials from 1981 to 1996. Gen Z, hello you, from 1997 to 2012. And then Gen Alpha from 2013 to mid 2020s. So I don't know what's coming next. Can't be Gen Beta. That would just be
Yeah, that's it. And I think it already is from 2026. Yeah.
But you might be born into one generation, but actually your values and the person you are, your psyche, belongs in another generation. How to find out? Well, guess what?
Guess what?
It's
Nick, it's your time to shine.
It's time for a Life Happens quiz. Yeah, we've got a quiz. So you have to go to the description of this particular episode, wherever you're watching it. And then before you do anything, you have to go and press like. Do it now. Then you have to subscribe. Costs nothing, but it just means we love you that much more. And then you can go and click on the quiz link. And this particular quiz is all about you answer various questions that relate to generational attitudes, shall we say. And it's called What Generation Am I? And it'll tell you. So I did it. It's not a massive secret that I'm actually, allegedly, a baby boomer. But my result was that apparently I'm a millennial, born between...
Which I'm not surprised by,
1981
honestly.
and 1996, so I'll go with that. 1996.
Yeah, I don't think you can officially use it in like forms and stuff. I don't think... I don't think anyone will believe you. But mentally, yeah, I'm not surprised, which sort of, is coming back to our episode about the age you feel versus the age you are.
So let me just do a couple of example questions we'll ask Michelle. Be fun.
Why me again?
Let me go. This is a good one for Michelle. It's movie night. How are you watching? How, not what.
With my eyes.
I'm flipping. Don't get biological on me. I'm flipping through the channels on TV until I see something interesting to watch. Or B, I'm going to the movie theater to watch something on the big screen. C, I'm streaming something on my TV. Or D, I'm watching a movie on my phone or computer. So how are you watching?
I just feel like you chose a really good question, because if you think about it, that exactly describes like how the world is changing. Because like the first thing, like flipping through TV stations, I feel like TV is really dying nowadays and people know it. And therefore it's a circle, because people are not watching it. They don't put so many things there. And because there are not so many things, people are not watching it, Sort of shows how the world is evolving. It's not something you prefer anymore. It's just how technology evolves. The second thing with like movie theaters, I don't know if you've went to see a movie in a movie theater lately, but it's so fucking expensive. It's actually painful. And so just to see a movie, it's not worth the money because it's so terribly expensive that I think that's the main reason. I'm not sure how is it in like other countries, but in Czech Republic, like especially, it's not worth it because it's so incredibly expensive. Everywhere, probably. And so that's also dying, but for another reason. And then the others are sort of like more modern and, it makes more sense. And it shows how the world is just different, not because it's a wrong thing, but because we just evolve, and it's a good thing we evolve,
Let's do another question. Let's find one that. When you think about your life, how do you usually feel? A, like I want things to be how they used to be. B, like I want things to stay how they are now. C, like I want things to be like they've never been before. Or D, like I'm not really sure like what I want. I kind of slanted that question a bit in how I asked it. You may have spotted that, you may not.
Is that an option? I don't want to think about my life.
Yeah, almost. The last one, like I'm not really sure what I want. But there isn't one that says, I obviously went for a C. Like I want things to be like they've never been before because I like change and adventure and things being different and
I'm
shaking
too
things up.
much. I'm too much of an overthinker for that. So my mind immediately goes like, oh my gosh, it can be even worse than it's now.
Did you do this quiz? Remind me, I can't remember. Did you do it?
I
did
did.
it. And your result was?
I had Gen Z.
So it was completely
yeah.
right.
And I was expecting that. And to be fair, I'm proud to be Gen Z in certain ways. I mean, in certain ways, these stereotypes are not really flattering, but mostly I'm happy to be Gen Z.
So with that, there's so much more we could talk about on this particular topic, but we just don't have the time today to do it. So we'll probably return to some of these ideas and topics in future episodes. But if you have any thoughts, then please, in the comments, let us know, and things that we could follow up about, or how you feel in your generation. And remember, go and do that quiz and find out what generation you really are. And while you're doing that, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe. And we'll be back with the next episode of Life Happens very soon.